20 years after the battle, John Gibbon, who was in temporary command of the Second Corps, remembered Meade warning him at the end of the council, "Gibbon, if Lee attacks me tomorrow, it will be on your front." This recollection from the most ardently anti-abolitionist officer of his rank in the Army has invested George Meade with the gift of prescience, especially since the great Confederate attack of July 3rd fell exactly upon the two intact brigades of Gibbon's old division at what we now call the Angle. It is curious, though, if Meade really did prophesy to Gibbon that he did so little to reinforce Gibbon's sector around the so-called clump of trees and the Bryan House. Of course, by the morning of July 3rd, Meade had comparatively little left on hand for reinforcing anything. In a note he dashed off to Margaretta at 8:45 on the morning of July 3rd, he said, "We had a great fight yesterday. Both armies shattered. Today at it again, with what result remains to be seen." Shattered was indeed the word. The 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 11th Corps had been wrecked in the previous 2 days' fighting, as had 2 divisions of the 2nd Corps and of the 12th Corps. Beyond Gibbon's old 2nd Corps division, Meade was left with only John Sedgwick's 6th Corps as a reserve. Even so, Meade gave no sign of anticipating the fall of the rebel hammer to John Cleveland Robinson, whose battered 1st Corps division was holding grimly onto the slopes of Cemetery Hill. Instead, Meade informed Robinson that, just as he had on July 2nd, he anticipated an attack on the cemetery by the enemy's forces massed in the town, rather than from Seminary Ridge. When, near 1 o'clock, the great preliminary barrage for Pickett's charge began raining down ordnance on Cemetery Hill, on Gibbon's troops just behind the hill, and on Meade's farmhouse headquarters just behind that, Meade's first move was to clear his headquarters staff out of the line of Confederate fire and move himself to Powers Hill, the outpost where 2 batteries of 10-pounder Parrott guns, Knapp's Battery E Pennsylvania Independent Artillery, and Winnegar's Battery M 1st New York Light Artillery, had been posted to cover the Baltimore Pike and the obvious line of retreat from Gettysburg. Meade was, in fact, nowhere near the apex of Pickett's charge when the high tide of the Confederacy struck the Angle, and he did not show up until his staffers were able to report the repulse of the Confederates. Surrounded by the milling after-battle flux of the wounded and the dazed, plus herds of rebel prisoners, Meade could only ask in amazement, "What? Is the assault already repulsed?" In the last hours of the afternoon of July 3rd, Meade moved first to Cemetery Hill, again still suspecting that a Confederate blow would fall there, and from there to Little Round Top, where he ordered Samuel Crawford and his old Pennsylvania Reserve Division to launch a tentative sweeping operation toward the Confederate right flank, where Hood's and McLaws' shredded divisions lay. James Longstreet fully expected to see Meade ride to the front and lead his forces to a tremendous countercharge. But Meade had even fewer resources at his disposal now, and even less inclination to risk what now looked to be a resounding victory. "Bully, bully, bully all around," Meade responded as reports came in, and a band came up to play Hail to the Chief. He was not about to jeopardize something as priceless as a Union victory for merely more victory. The tone amongst most of the prominent officers was that we had done enough. Meade would not actually begin a pursuit of the Army of Northern Virginia until July 6th. And even though deserters and prisoners from the rebel army represented it in a deplorable condition, with its back against a rain-swollen Potomac, Meade failed to press them to destruction. And on July 14th, Lee successfully got his survivors across the river to fight another day. The Army of the Potomac was incensed. Next, please. According to the surgeon of the 77th New York, the correspondents of the press misrepresent the facts 9 times in 10 when they assert that veterans are anxious to fight. The Captain Henry Nichols Blake of the 11th Massachusetts added, the soldiers who bore muskets wished to hear the commands, take arms and charge, because they knew then that it would have captured all the cannon, materials, and men from the enemy and finished the rebellion. But those were not the commands Blake or anyone else would hear from George Gordon Meade. Happily for the Army of the Potomac, Meade did not lose the Battle of Gettysburg. If he had, the results would have been catastrophic for the Union, even with the offset of Vicksburg on July 4th. But it is hard to reward him with much credit for having won it. He allowed his own native instinct for risk aversion and the shadow of McClellanite politics to impair his tactical and command decision-making. He could have lost the war in an afternoon. He could also have won it in that same afternoon. Weighed in the balance against his victory were the blood and treasure which 2 more years of civil war would demand. Next. It was the advice of the Duke of Wellington in 1803. Do not remain in your position, however strong it may be. Choose the field of battle yourself some days before. Meet them on that very ground. You will find them in the common disorder of march. They will not have time to form, and you will gain an easy victory. How different conclusions might have been had George Gordon Meade taken that advice is the stuff of historical dreams. But there has never been much enthusiasm for erecting statues to might-have-beens. Thank you very much. I am told that General Meade has